There's a reason you can't go to a clean girl bar and talk about clean girl politics with your clean girl friends. Because clean girl is an aesthetic, not a subculture. Subcultures bring people together as a cultural group within a larger culture, often sharing beliefs or interests. Right now, we are in the era of aesthetics and microtrends, which act more as solo activities. So, clean girl is more of a shopping list than an identity, and it simply requires Wi-Fi, a credit card, and a visual motivation. The kidcore or indie aesthetic trend was at its peak in the beginning of 2020, but because it required you to purchase different items like charms, plushies, and knickknacks in order to be able to live in the aesthetic, it fell off after just a year, leaving us to mourn the death of the 2010s all over again. Subcultures like punk, goth, and hip-hop were like real tribes. They gave you instant community, a place to go, known as third places, and a unique shared language. Subcultures naturally develop over time in conjunction with friction against mainstream trends, policies, and ideologies. This created exclusivity, which was earned through rites of passage, which acted as a protective barrier that preserved the subculture's integrity against mainstream dilution. This identified what we know now as wannabes or posers. Posers would want into these exclusive cultures without performing the work to be accepted by the tribe. In most instances, they would try to act like they belong, essentially cosplaying as being a part of that group, quickly being called out by original members of the societies. Wannabe originated in 1981 and was derived from American English surfer slang from the casual pronunciation of want to be. When subculture was at its peak, poser or wannabe was the absolute worst thing you could be called. People took it seriously back then. But now, the constant loop and merging of aesthetics and microtrends grants us psychological freedom to experiment without the fear of being labeled a poser. In essence, we're technically all posers and wannabes because cosplay is now the norm. So is this a good or a bad thing? I honestly think it depends. Lack of identity is a double-edged sword. Economic structures have made it impossible for subculture to exist anymore. As a result, the internet, and specifically TikTok, has become the place where subculture becomes diluted and oversaturated, and thus the rise of microtrends and niche aesthetics. The lack of a specific 2020s identity can be perceived as inherently good because it removes the pressure to perform any specific identity correctly. If everything is trending at the same time, Y2K, goth, coquette, old money, then nothing is really cringe. On the contrary, in the early 2000s, if you wore the wrong kind of jeans, you were socially ostracized. Today, because there's no dominant monoculture that we can specifically identify with, you can basically wear whatever you want. This specific kind of chaos has created a black hole of judgment. Therefore, it can be considered personally liberating on one hand and culturally dangerous on the other. Without a collective identity, it may be more difficult for us to organize and create community. If none of us can imagine or define a new aesthetic future, stuck constantly recycling the 2000s and the 2010s, it probably means we're having trouble defining the new political future. A society that mostly looks backward can be assumed as a society in decline. We find ourselves finding comfort daydreaming and reheating nachos from the past because we may be too scared to build towards the future with what we have. Or maybe we fear that we have lost the presumed ability or permissions even to be able to do so. Fundamentally, our social structure hasn't shifted since 2015 if you really think about it. We're still on smartphones scrolling through an endless feed of cores and eras. If someone woke up from a decade-long coma today, they wouldn't find a completely new world. They would step right back into the loop by begrudgingly swapping their skinny jeans for a wide-leg pair and adopting the clean girl aesthetic. In essence, not much has changed. We've used these microtrends from the 2014 Tumblr revival to the hyper-feminine coquette look as distractions from the fact that our actual lives are standing still, which we did talk about in the 2026 US economics video regarding the economic stagnation theory. We are left with being forced to glamorize and romanticize our life because we feel bored and empty. We hop from aesthetic to aesthetic and perform for the void because there's really nothing else to do. I think the concept of us collectively indulging in a pre-2010s dream of escapism, waiting for another major event to happen, which as of now everyone thinks is going to be the acceleration of AI. It's like we're all just waiting for that to shift something so that the trauma from the early 2020s feels more like a distant past. I think we're all waiting to collectively identify with something again. I don't think that's too far of a reach, but I wouldn't be mad if you disagree. However, there is no denying the stagnation of the Western economy, especially in reference to the quick and constant recycling of microtrends like glazed donut lips and tomato girl, and how these corporations and companies are constantly recycling through these trends and trying to get their hands on the newest buzzword or newest aesthetic so that they can sell out in the time frame that it's popular, which that time frame seems to be getting shorter and shorter. Even at the highest levels of industry, we see examples of this stagnation. For example, in fashion, we can observe what Harel Aurora calls archive culture. In her analysis for Vogue Chaos, Aurora argues that image architects like La Roche have effectively strangled fashion's future by prioritizing historical activations over modern innovation. Aurora explicitly notes that while the industry's lack of imagination is a systemic issue, figureheads who prioritize archive addiction share a massive portion, or at least 75%, of the blame for the current creative recession. When the ultimate status symbol for an it girl on the red carpet is a pull from 1995, it sends the message that the past is inherently more valuable than anything we could create in 2026. This is like an obsession that suggests we are using the past to fill a personality void in the present. And if the presumed gatekeepers of industries like this one are constantly looking backward, it seems like there's no room for new artists, let alone new movements to breathe and develop over time. So are we being tormented by our own obsessions with the past and our addiction to nostalgia? Are we in a constant loop of mourning the missed opportunity of what was? Author of critically acclaimed books Capitalist Realism and Ghosts of My Life, Mark Fisher seems to think so. Hauntology is a philosophic term coined by Mark Fisher, the highly influential British writer, cultural theorist, and academic who blended politics, music criticisms, and philosophy to analyze contemporary culture. It is described as the cultural phenomenon where a society is unable to invent a future, so it keeps repeating the past. He references the hopes and dreams of the 90s rave generation that never actually happened, suggesting the music transforms a familiar city into something unlifelike or hallucinogenic, where the ghosts of old rave parties haunt the modern, dreary subways of London. He emphasizes that the faded 10-year-old tag of a graffiti artist now working a dead-end job represents the death of a youthful optimism. Fisher suggests that we are haunted not only by the past, but by lost futures. It seems to have less to do with the near future than with the tantalizing ache of a future just out of reach. In Ghosts of My Life, he expresses feelings of melancholy in regards to the subject of nostalgia, ultimately exposing the sentimental, often bittersweet longing for the past as regrets of what could have been. This makes me think of the adulthood I was promised trend on TikTok. So I think that the hauntological feeling of grief is mirrored in this contemporary trend. I feel like this trend is a nostalgic and slightly bitter microgenre that sees women posting idealized imagery of the grown-up life that they expected as children, only to contrast it with the precarious economic reality of the present. One Threads user captures the sentiment perfectly, saying, "The Pussycat Dolls were so tea. That's what I imagined my adult life would be like. Hot body and cute clothes." Just as Fisher's London is haunted by the ghost of the rave, these digital spaces, these e-girls, are haunted by the lost future of 2000s girlhood, which was supposed to be a world of constant shopping, glamorous city nights, and financial freedom that now feels like a dream out of reach, or just a straight up lie that they sold to us. For some of us, this obsession with the past could be a symptom of being in survival mode. We pay the inevitable price of participating in adulthood, and that ticket is expensive, while the value we get in return feels hollow. We pay 2026 prices for a life that feels like a downgrade. It feels like it's from the past, from the one we were promised as kids. I remember being a little girl and my sisters got to experience $700 apartments, $200 and $300 car payments, and they could afford to go out on the weekends at the same time. But straight out of high school, apartments were $1,200 compared to that $700. Car payments were $500 and $600 compared to $200 and $300 that it used to be. And in this economy, it's like almost taboo to go out on the weekends. I don't even think dance clubs exist anymore. And it's like the more things got expensive and the less that we got paid over time, it almost totally rewired the way we chose to decompress. Or maybe we're just too stressed to dance the pain away. It's so funny because if you think about it, staying home on the weekends is like the new norm. It's the new cool thing to do. It's like, I'm gonna stay in my apartment, I'm gonna stay in my home and enjoy the bills that I pay for. I'm going to enjoy the amenities that I have here. But yeah, if you didn't watch the 2026 economics video, definitely watch that because we talk a lot about the stagnation theory, but more on the economic end rather than an aesthetics end. But I think this is why we cling to these niche aesthetics and these micro trends, because if we can't afford the actual freedom of the early 2000s and the 90s, at least we can buy the list of tangible items that make us feel like we are within that era. It is basically coping, it is self-medicating our economic stress with a visual aesthetic mood board of the good old days. But let's be honest, I feel like we all know we shouldn't over-romanticize the past. Contrary to popular belief, Western subcultures didn't even hold as much revolutionary potential as they seemed to. They were always capitalistic markets seeking to extend to the fringes. Even punk professed hyper-bourgeois virtues like individualism and performative authenticity. Eventually, the politics became yet another aesthetic. The past was consumption disguised as community, and the 2020s completely did away with the disguise. We used to collectively consume content for open and inclusive discussion, but now we're being forced into echo chamber algorithms that essentially brands and labels us in categories, boxing us in and discouraging the value of embracing opposing opinions or opposing lifestyles. They get away with this by conditioning us to give into isolating behaviors like doom scrolling or craving echo chamber validation. It's a facade to make us feel like we are a part of a community when really it's a perpetuation of parasocial digital tribalism. And don't get me wrong, it's not a bad thing to have access to an online community. It's just that the issue is real culture and subcultures require time to incubate in the dark, long enough to develop a unique philosophy or lifestyle. The current algorithm demands daily content, which means nothing can stay underground, and subcultures are considered fleeting if there is no direct monetary value. Think about it, as soon as subversive fashion or edgy talking points catch a wave, it is mass produced within 7 days, and now everyone has a take on it. So it does give me the illusion that the 2020s don't have an identity. It's just vibes. Going back to revisiting the philosophy of hauntology, it seems that we are so polarized by speculations and events like AI taking over our future that we kind of refuse to create our own. We're kind of like in a shocked phase. We're kind of stuck right now. And although there's still this craving we have to be different and create something new, we usually end up using past creative works and references to subcultures that already exist as an archival playground. So, because we have no new or revolutionary culture of our own, the generational cycle is broken. Usually, cultures rely on generational friction. Teenagers rebel against adults to create cool, and adults eventually copy them. These days, we see children bypassing play for maintenance, so they're executing trends instead of experimenting. Simultaneously, some trends show us that adult women are, in a way, regressing. And we see this within the Lolita trend, the coquette trend, and even with the soft life, soft girl trend. I do in a way feel that we should, as a generation, take some responsibility for this influence, because I think some of the discord surrounding pretty privilege and beauty as survival has spilled over into the younger generations. I feel like some of the sentiments that we've had about beauty for the past couple of years, especially in regards to dating and socioeconomics, that we've somehow forgot to gatekeep those kinds of sentiments away from children so that they are not so consumed and obsessed with their looks at such early ages where it shouldn't really matter. And so at this point, we are all just staring at each other in a hall of mirrors, repeating the same trends without evolution, because there's really no substance here. If we could just admit to ourselves and to each other that most of the outward aesthetics and rituals that we perform are performances and everything is just a costume, and when you adopt aesthetics like Tomato Girl, you're playing a character, then we can stop stressing about finding ourselves. To me, this further supports the idea of a stagnated culture because of the absence of commitment. We don't really want to do the work as much as we want to cultivate and curate this archive of work on the ether, never having anything tangible to support it or back it up. In this, we've traded community for autonomy. We are the freest generation of women in history regarding self-expression, but we are also the loneliest because we are expressing ourselves into a void rather than cultivating an actual community. Nevertheless, let's observe what people have to say about what they think the 2020s aesthetics was or what it will be. There have been a good amount of takes on what the look, tone, and feel of the 2020s gives. So let me know in the comments what you think the final determined aesthetic of the 2020s will be. Right now, it seems like to me we are in the stage of revivalism, and that could technically be the overarching theme of the 2020s, constantly trying to bring what was alive back. It's almost like we are so traumatized, we just cannot let go of the past. We need to keep giving it CPR so that it can at least give us a little bit of life, a little bit of meaning, a little bit of what makes sense to us. So instead of a singular aesthetic, I would say the 2020s are defined by revivalism. And it's a seemingly fractured response to the instability of the current decade. This movement acts as a temporal spectrum where every subculture is essentially a choice of which direction to run, whether that's toward a speculative future, a chaotic present, or a rigid and disciplined past. By viewing these trends through a lens of time, we can argue that they are survival strategies and ideological statements about where we believe society is headed. And this is just my opinion, so feel free to let me know what you think in the comments. So let's talk about Neo-Futurism. There's this growing argument that our true identity for the 2020s is Neo-Futurism. For the sake of this video not being 2 hours long, we will use Neo-Futurism as an umbrella that houses Neo-Y2K aesthetics, brutalism, and utilitarian design. We can see this in the many overly CGI music videos we got in the first half of the decade. It gives an accelerist vibe where we don't fear tech and we leap into the synthetic perfection or imperfection and the overlapping transhumanism of it all. And this represents a speculative future where technology is embraced as an extension of the self, and it is a form of accelerationism characterized by boredom with the organic and a desire to leap into the next stage of human advancements. By referencing the tech optimism of the early 2000s, this group signals a rejection of current stagnation, opting instead for a high-gloss synthetic perfection that feels ahead of the general population. Another aesthetic that bridges the gap between high-tech futurism and the next pillar that involves juvenile nostalgia is the Brat and indie sleaze aesthetic. So the Brat era, I believe, mimics the early 2010s Kesha era, which I think could be the epitome of indie sleaze as we know it now. So these messy aesthetics were also reminiscent of the 2007 UK TV show Skins, which was known for its explicit, non-judgmental depiction of teen angst in its most raw form, involving partying, mental health struggles, and chaotic lifestyles. So Skins was actually a deliberate rejection of technical formalism. So while futurists use tech to craft the perfect e-aesthetics, the Brat and indie sleaze aesthetics use it for de-skilled expression, like Windows Paint style graphics and low fidelity visuals. So it's like a trashy and edgy look that functions as like a cigarette breathed laugh in the face of polished design or conformity. It is both futuristic and juvenile, which captures a specific brand of teens and young adults that try to look effortless while being deeply curated, effectively mocking the seriousness of both the tech-obsessed and the clean conformist. So I want to stay here even while we get into the next aesthetic, which is kidcore, which was also ironically called indie at the beginning of 2020. And it's so interesting because it is very rooted in the concept of childlike play, except as teens and young adults, but combined with the indie sleaze aesthetic. And I think we can see this kind of blend with popular artists like Addison Rae or Lara Zarson. The movement toward maximalist kidcore and neo-brutalism represents a sentimental present. I would say this aesthetic is pure escapism and a response to the exhaustion of girl boss culture and corporate sterility. It is therapeutic maximalism, where adults lean into vibrant colors, neon signs, and soft roles like Coquette or Lolita to heal their inner child. And this aesthetic is a form of collective mourning for a lost childhood essence. So as 10-year-olds skip their youth to become clean girls at Sephora, adults are reclaiming that childhood territory to anchor themselves in this world that feels so increasingly volatile and demanding. Finally, we have the clean girl and neo-conservative movements, which represents a disciplined past. This group views the chaos of individualistic be-yourself movements as a threat, choosing instead to retreat into nudes, neutrals, and rigid minimalism. So it is a return to hegemonic standards where the uniform provides a sense of safety and community power. So essentially, by refusing to color outside of the lines, this aesthetic prioritizes social order and maturity over self-expression, seeing the return to traditional, safe, and conformist visuals as the only way to thrive in an unpredictable climate. Overall, determining the definitive aesthetic of a decade generally takes about 10 to 20 years after it ends, a delay often driven by the 20-year rule of nostalgia and the time needed to distill major cultural shifts into recognizable trends. While iconic decades like the 1980s were quickly identified, the 2000s and 2010s have taken longer to define due to the acceleration of trend cycles, social media, and the recycling of microtrends, causing the 2020s to feel stuck in a mix of previous eras. You know you like this video, so make sure you subscribe, Thumbs up the video and share your opinion in the comments. You never know, it could be considered in the future. Thank you so much for joining me in today's video. Bye!